Hi, this is a quick video about interval inversions. So when you think about intervals, it's important to recognize that every musical interval has an inversion. So take this example that you see on the screen. When you're going down from this D5 on top to the A below it, you're traveling down 4 letter names or 4 lines and spaces. So it's got to be some kind of fourth. But if we use the same 2 notes, like if we go from A down to the D below that, G4, that's a total of 5 lines and spaces, or 5 letter names. So that must be some kind of fifth. So every pair of notes has 2 different intervals that they can make, depending on which pitch you put as the higher one. These 2 intervals are inversions of each other. So you want to notice that these 2 intervals together, D down to A, and then down to the D below that, cover an entire octave. The term for that is it's complementary. Something that takes up the entire octave is complementary. And this is true of any 2 interval inversions. So, for example, say I go from B flat to D flat. Because it's a B to a D, B, C, D, it must be some kind of third. From a D flat to the B flat above that completes the octave, and that goes a total of 6 lines and spaces. So one way to think of it is that an interval and its inversion always add up to 9 in size. So 3 plus 6, or 4 plus 5, that's 8 for the octave, plus 1 for the overlap in the middle, where you count the middle note twice, if that kind of makes sense. Another important thing to know is that an interval and its inversion will always have opposite qualities. So take this one. So from the E below middle C, or E3, to middle C, is some kind of sixth. It's a minor sixth, and we know this because we ask ourselves the question, is my upper note in my key of my lower note? Do I have a C natural in the key of E major in this case? No, I don't. In E major, I should have a C sharp. That means this is too small to be major. It must be minor. So that's my minor sixth. Then, if I keep going until I reach the octave by continuing up from C to the E above that, that must be some kind of third, because it's 3 lines and spaces, or 3 letter names. And it must be major, because I ask myself, do I have an E in my key of C major? And I sure do. So that's got to be a major third. And we could also double check this by comparing it with our chart that tells us exactly how many half steps are in each interval quality. But we don't need to double check it, because this will work for any 2 intervals that are an interval and its inversion. They always flip-flop in quality, except for the perfect ones. Remember, we talked about how intervals that ascend from Do are all major or perfect. Intervals that descend from Do are all minor or perfect. So knowing that, we can see why it is that perfect intervals don't flip-flop qualities when they're inverted. It's because of the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half pattern of the diatonic scale. So for instance, whether I make a perfect fourth by going this way up from Do, or perfect fourth by making it this way down from Do, they have the same number of half steps in them. Same thing for the fifths. My perfect fifth going down from Do has the same number of half steps as my perfect fifth coming up from Do. So that means the inversions keep the same quality, because a perfect fourth is going to invert to a perfect fifth, and vice versa. Also, I want to point out that, again, we have the diminished fifth and the augmented fourth. Those are inversions of each other, and their qualities flip-flop, even though they both have exactly 6 half steps in them. So just because they are like exactly the same literal size interval, their quality is still changed, because we call one diminished and the other one augmented. So let's just do a couple exercises from the teoria.com homework together. So first, you would count lines and spaces to figure out the size of the interval that you see. So in this case, space, line, space, it's some kind of third. Now, what I taught you was, ask yourself, is the upper note in the key of the lower note? And that can be tricky when you have a lower note where it's been enharmonically respelled. So, for instance, in this case, we don't really have a key of A sharp major to compare it to. We could respell both of these notes. We could call this one B flat. That's wonderful looking. And we could call this one D flat, and then compare those two and ask ourselves, do we have a D flat in the key of B flat major? Well, no, we don't. It's too small. It should be B natural. So even when you change them back and harmonically respell them to be A sharp and C sharp, they'll have the same relationship. They'll still be a minor third apart. That's one way to do it. We could just remove these sharps temporarily. Get rid of that one, get rid of that one. Since both notes lost a sharp, they both were changed by the same amount. So then we can just pretend we have an A and a C, and then it's a lot easier to ask yourself, do I have a regular C natural in my key of A major? Once again, no, I don't. It's too small, so it must be a minor third. So either of those ways will work when you're faced with something like a lower note like an A sharp. Here's another example. If we're not too great on remembering our flat keys, we could just remove the flats from both of these notes and call this one D and this one B, and then ask yourself, do I have a B natural in my key of D natural? And the answer is yes, I absolutely do. Of course, before we do that, we need to count lines and spaces, space line, space line, space line. So this is some kind of sixth. And because I do, in fact, have a B natural in my key of D natural, it's going to be major. The second half of the problem is to tell if the interval is inverted, what interval would it be? So in this case, we want to take this D flat and rewrite it up an octave so that it's above the B flat. That's the easiest way to think of it. Then do the same problem. Ask yourself, if I were in the key of B flat major, would I have a D flat? Remember, you're always thinking to yourself, is my upper note in my key of my lower note? Because what you're really asking is this an interval that I can create by ascending from Do in a diatonic scale, like where we do the touch the toes, go to the knees exercise? Well, in this case, no, you wouldn't have D flat in your key of B flat major. You would have D. So this is too small. So it's some kind of third because we can count line, space, line. And we also should know that because we know that we were expecting an interval with a size that would add up to 9 with a major sixth. So it's a third, it's too small to be major, it's got to be minor. And that's correct. And look, they even drew a D flat where I drew mine. So that was a really fast rundown on interval inversions. Again, this is part of your homework, and if you have questions, please just email me.